I hope you're all doing well. Today I bring you my kind of Halloween special. I am actually filming this on Halloween, which is nice. And we have added to our decorations this year by adding in some ghost lights from Kmart to complement the pumpkin and skeleton heads from Coles. So in October I like to read Halloween, spooky, scary themed books. I'm not really a fan of proper horror films, but I don't mind reading a spooky book or two to get into the spirit of Halloween. I talked about some of the books that I wanted to read in my last video and I didn't quite get to all of them, so I ended up reading 3 Halloween books and then also one other book which I'll get to in a second. So the first book that I finished in October was The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley. If that name sounds familiar, even if you've never heard of the book, that might be because there is a Netflix adaptation of the book, which everyone is currently raving about. I haven't watched it myself because, as I said, I'm not really a fan of actual horror films. So this book is about a character called Dr. Montague who wants to investigate whether there are really paranormal activities going on in Hill House. So he sends out letters to a bunch of people that he has researched and found have experienced paranormal things in the past, wanting them to come and join him in the house to properly investigate. He ends up only managing to recruit 2 people, Eleanor and Theodora, and he is also asked by the family who own the house to have one of the family members with them as well. So the heir to the house, Luke, joins them. This book is not plot heavy, it mainly just follows the 4 characters in their investigations around the house, interactions with each other, and then some of the very spooky things that happen, which we are never quite sure are just happening in their head or are really happening in the house. I really enjoyed Shirley Jackson's other novel, We Have Always Lived in the Castle, which I read last year. I didn't quite enjoy this one as much. There are definitely really great moments in it. The bits where there is ghostly occurrences happening are truly terrifying. I read one of these chapters before going to bed and I genuinely found myself quite scared. It's a book that I enjoyed while I was reading it, but by the end I wasn't quite sure really what the book was trying to say or if there was any meaning behind it or whether it was written purely just to creep people out. The next book I finished in October was Something Wicked This Way Comes by Bradbury. This book is set in October in a small town in America and is about Will and Jim, who are 2 boys just about to turn 14 who have always been friends and live next door to each other. A circus comes into town. Jim and Will soon realize that this circus and its owner, Mr. Dark, are very evil and get caught up in a mystery surrounding a carousel in the circus, which can turn people young or old depending on which way they are riding the carousel. The whole time I was reading this, I was thinking this would make a much better movie. And then I read that Bradbury originally wrote this as a script, but then couldn't get any funding to get it made, so turned it into a book instead. And it does make sense. It's a very visual book. I found the descriptions of the town and the circus and all the creepy stuff going on really vivid. Where I felt the book was let down a little bit was by the characterizations. They did feel a little bit stereotyped. I find Bradbury has a very convoluted way of writing. I get that he's trying to be very artistic, but I found it kind of difficult to get into because every sentence I'd have to read twice to work out what the meaning was. So I don't think the story is bad in itself, but I didn't find it that enjoyable to read. But I think it would make a really interesting film adaptation in a sort of Stranger Things style way. You could very easily change a few things around to make it more modern and put more female characters in some of the main roles. Next, I read Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste. This was not part of my Halloween TBR, but I've had this book on request from the library for about 5 months, I think. When I first requested it, it had about 30 holds on it before mine. I had to wait a very long time for all those 30 people to read the book. So I finally got the book this month, and because it still has so many requests on it, I had to read it within 3 weeks. However, this turned out to be the book I enjoyed the most out of this month. This is for the most part about a fairly wealthy family living near Cleveland in, I think it was in the late 90s, and then also about a mum and her daughter who move into the neighborhood and sort of people's pasts and secrets begin to come to the surface. I can definitely see why Reese Witherspoon is making a TV adaptation of this book. I haven't read Big Little Lies, but reading the book definitely reminded me of the TV adaptation of Big Little Lies. I found it really easy to read and really enjoyable. I really liked the descriptions of the suburb where they lived. Reading it at first, I thought the author had made this place up, but then I googled it and found it was a real place called Shaker Heights, On looking on Google Maps, it truly is an amazingly leafy and green and prosperous looking suburb. I do love this kind of book where it's all very suburban bliss on the surface, but behind the picket white fence there is all kinds of stuff going on. Yeah, so I really enjoyed that one. And then this book that I finally finished yesterday is The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. Kind of been reading this for about a month now, and 700 pages shouldn't really be that much, in that I've read all of Charles Dickens' books and some of his books are a lot longer than that. Maybe it's just because I read those when I was 16 and I had more time on my hands, but this felt like it took ages. For some reason I thought I'd read this before. I think this is because my mum owns a lot of Wilkie Collins books, and some of them are all in one big book as a compilation, and then The Woman in White is separate on its own. So I think I assumed that I read that one because I would be more likely to pick up that individual book than try to read that massive compilation book. But I do not remember anything about this plot at all, so potentially I read The Moonstone instead. So basically this book starts off with a guy called Walter Hartwright. He is a painter. He's visiting his mum and his sister just outside of London, and walking home he comes across this woman wearing white. She says that she has escaped from an asylum because she's not crazy. She got locked up against her will and she needs his help to get to London. And this sets off a chain of events that involve these two half-sisters, Marion and Laura. They coincidentally engage Walter as a painting tutor, and he discovers the remarkable similarity between Laura and the Woman in White in that they basically look like twins. I think I was frustrated by this book because it could have been pretty good in a Gothic Victorian way, because this book was published in Charles Dickens' paper where it would have been published weekly, I suppose. Of course, like a lot of Dickens books, it's just padded out because it wasn't particularly intended to be published in one volume. So I guess in a way it kind of reads like when you binge watch a sitcom, in that things get repetitive because the sitcom that was made back in the day was made to be watched as a half-hour episode every week. I think the main problem with this book as opposed to Dickens novels is that Wilkie Collins is not nearly as good a writer. It did serve to remind me that Dickens and Austen are truly talented writers. It's not just that they were writing in the way people wrote back in the day. The characters are also pretty cliche and not much original about them. Definitely Marion was the most interesting to read about. She is sort of given the character of a woman who would rather be a man in a way. She is frustrated that being a woman gives her these limits, but in that she's also cliche as well. I found it so annoying the way she would constantly go on about how intrinsically she wasn't able to do certain things because of being a woman, or intrinsically she would do things because she was a woman, which I understand is the way people thought at the time, and Wilkie Collins is not a woman, so he doesn't know that women are actually just human beings like everyone else. But it gets incredibly repetitive. Probably the most interesting thing I got out of this novel is that it really served to highlight how trapped women were at the time and how reliant they had to be on men. The character of Laura Fairley marries someone that her father wanted her to marry before he died. He's called Sir Percival and he's about 20 years older than her, and it's not until they are married that she realizes he is a really awful, brutal person, but she can't do anything about it because she's married to him and she's reliant on him for everything. So I wouldn't really recommend this one. I gave it 3 stars. I'd probably give it 3.5 stars if Goodreads would allow half stars. So that is all that I read in October. Let me know if you have read any of these books and your thoughts on them. I hope you had a great Halloween. I'm celebrating by eating gingerbread cookies that I made using these Halloween cookie cutters that I again got from Coles. They are quite cute though. There's like a ghost and a cat and a pumpkin. I hope you have a great day and I will see you soon. Bye!